Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Crisis Core. Sorry about the scheduled Alien Isolation video that was meant to go up today. To be honest, I wasn't in the best mindset to play Alien Isolation. It's been a very stressful couple of days. Nothing bad, just long days, and I need a clear head to play Alien Isolation. It causes a lot of stress. Which is fine. We're near the end of Crisis Core now, and I wanted to finish up by trying to complete all, if not as many missions as I possibly could. Now, obviously, this is a fairly tedious and long part of the game, so whilst I play, I thought I would just sort of talk. I'm going to do a recap of the story up till now, whilst you watch, and sort of explain a little bit more about what I'm doing in the video as well. So I'm in the cage like I was in the last episode, and basically what I'm trying to do is get as much stuff as possible, because this game, your leveling up is random, which means leveling up probably doesn't matter as much as it does in other games, which is fine. That's okay. Because it's random. So it matters more what you're equipped with, i.e. materia. So I'm trying to find as much good materia as possible. And off camera I've been experimenting with fusions and God knows what. So yeah, you can watch and see what missions I'm doing whilst listening to me. And also I want to do a quick recap of the story. Well, I say a quick recap. I want to do a recap of the story. So I've got some notes here, so I'm just going to go through what's happened so far. So basically, right at the start, we meet Zack, who is a second-class soldier under Angeal's. He's a mentor to him, and he's at a training simulation in the soldier training room. And Zack is there to defeat Wu-Tai troops, but gets bested by a simulated Sephiroth. So Angeal calls off the simulation, of course, and quotes Zack his famous tagline, "Embrace your dreams." To be a hero, you need to have dreams and honor. So they head to Lazard's office, and they find out that Genesis has basically been MIA, missing in action, for quite some time, and that he's assumed dead at this point, but we need to investigate what's going on. So we end up going to Wu-Tai to try and end the Wu-Tai war. Wu-Tai is a nation that Shinra has been at war with for years, by the way, and we find out that Angeal has recommended Zack to become first class. So Lazard's obviously keeping a very close eye on us at this point. If I didn't mention before, sorry, Lazard is the director of Soldier. So they go to the Wu-Tai stronghold, and Angeal talks about growing up in Benora, and which is a place known for these special apples, and they're called dumb apples. And he would steal them because they couldn't afford them, so he would take them from the best province in the land. But he wouldn't take them from the very best, because that land was owned by his friend Genesis, who is the one that's gone missing. So Zack takes on the fortress, and we learn of a anti-Shinra or anti-soldier weapon, which is effectively a monster. We defeat the monster, and Angeal saves us from sort of an ambush that the monster pulls from us. And then Ifrit is summoned, who is a summon famous for the Final Fantasy series, but in this game he is a fire-based summon, and we have to defeat him. Later on, we meet up with Sephiroth, and we find troops that sort of bear a resemblance to Genesis. And we defeat those, and sorry, I couldn't find my note there. So after we defeat those, we struggle to find Angeal. And Zack and Sephiroth end up leaving together. So at this point, we're sort of assuming that Angeal is deserted as well. At this point, we don't really know why Genesis has deserted. Again, we don't even know if he's alive at this point. So Zack then gets sent to Benora with Sung, the Turk, to investigate Genesis's disappearance. Turks, by the way, are like sort of a secret service for Shinra. Basically, they're above a soldier, and their jurisdiction is basically usually intelligence capture, but at times it's like dirty work, so not good. And they end up finding a lot of graves, including those of Genesis's foster parents. And Zack, we play, and we eventually find Angeal's mother, and we finally meet Genesis. It turns out he's been using the apple factory, as I said before, the Benora makes these sort of dumb apples, and as his base of operations. Upon meeting Genesis, we found out that he's sort of pseudo-obsessed with a play or a tragedy or whatever it's called Loveless, and he constantly quotes it. And as we move through the story, we'll find that some of the story has parallels with the actual game's story. So, upon finding all this out, Shinra plans to bomb the village, basically to cover it all up. Basically, it's a Resident Evil situation where they try and sort of bomb the evidence. And Zack obviously feels compliance to warn Angeal's mother, so he ends up going back to see her, or we play going back to see her. And she's dead. She's on the floor, and Angeal is sort of standing with her or over her. They have a bit of a should we say a one-way conversation, and it's cut short by Genesis summoning Bahamut. And Bahamut is the King of the Dragons summon that again very famous within Final Fantasy. So we end up fighting against Bahamut, sorry. And Genesis ends up growing this wing, like a black wing, and ends up flying away. So at this point, Genesis is basically amassing an army at this point of clones. Zack is now promoted to first class as well by Director Lazard. Basically, we fight through the headquarters of Shinra because the Genesis army is invading, and he's using a lot of Shinra technology, like machines like sweepers and things like that. And we end up rescuing another Turk, Cisne, who is a female member of the Turks, on the way to the Mako reactor. I think it's number 5. Sephiroth says Angeal has been spotted. Initially, Zack is reluctant to hunt down his old mentor. Obviously, he feels a strong emotional connection to him. But Sephiroth, he's got plans to let him escape before the army finds him. He wants to give him another chance. On the way, we find monsters that have Angeal's face on them. They don't look like Angeal, they're too bestial, but they've got Angeal's face sort of tattooed on the top of their head. And it's quite a similar thing to the whole Genesis situation. And then we find information on Genova Project G. Now, if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VII, Genova projects should sound quite familiar. But this is the part of the project that made both Genesis and Angeal. But it was deemed a complete failure, a complete flop. Sephiroth conjures up the G, stands for Project Genesis. And we now find out that Genesis and Angeal are both degrading. They're both degrading, they're both breaking down, their bodies are failing. And they're dying because of their sort of bad birth, if you like. After that, we pretty much see like the coolest fighting scene ever, where you see them training together. Not Zack, Genesis, Angeal, and Sephiroth are trained together on a virtual reality system, but it's showing Junon. So it's quite a cool look at Junon while they're doing their training. And Genesis basically wants to become a hero and declares he wants to take on Sephiroth alone to prove that he can be that hero. Don't forget, at this point, Sephiroth is considered a war hero. He's basically revered and like celebrated amongst soldiers as a hero. So, by the way, I'm sorry if I'm saying a lot. I'm just reading my notes, and I've taken little excerpts from the wiki as well, so bear with me. I'm sort of reading through it and trying to add more and take more away, and I'm not used to reading from a script, so bear with me. So anyway, Sephiroth ends up taking Genesis on, like I said before, and Angeal ends up stopping them. Genesis is then injured in the shoulder, and the whole training exercise is stopped. We then find out that Genesis has basically joined forces with Hollander, who is a scientist from Shinra, who's gone renegade. He has basically promised a cure to Genesis and Angeal, but he's promised Genesis primarily that he can heal him. But we kind of figured this out quite early on, that Hollander's using Genesis like a personal weapon, and he's trying to get his own back on Shinra. So anyway, we try and capture Hollander. Angeal comes back and he sprouts white wings as a parody to Genesis's black. Zack and Angeal have a long conversation about what denotes a monster, because Angeal's convinced he's now become a monster, and obviously isn't too happy about that. Zack refuses to fight against his mentor and friend, and we end up getting thrown off a platform down into the slums in Midgar. So quite a lot's happened already. You know, our mentor has become disillusioned with the idea that he's a monster. Genesis is kind of embraced it, but he's obviously trying to find a cure for his issues, but he's very much against the Shinra at this point for making him. And we're not really sure what Hollander's ultimate sort of aim is at this point. When Zack lands, he lands in the Sector 5 slums, in the church, and he meets Aerith Gainsborough, who is a very familiar name. I'm sure you'll be aware of who that is. And basically, she's like sort of calling him until he wakes up, and he lands just like Cloud does in 7 on the flower bed. Zack, on the conversation, convinces her to go on a date with him into the slums, but he has his wallet stolen by a child, and yeah, we end up having to find said child, and it's a long drawn out quest, which it's not super important to the overall story, but it's definitely important to the side story that Zack and Aerith are very involved. So Aerith and Zack have a conversation about the fact that Aerith fears Soldier. She's like terrified of the idea of a sort of enhanced Soldier. And Zack confesses that he is indeed Soldier. Zack then gets a phone call basically from Shinra HQ that says that Genesis has attacked Shinra. But he's targeting Professor Hojo. Now, Hojo is another name you should recognise if you're a fan of Final Fantasy. Sephiroth is sent to secure the president, and Zack is sent to Hojo's aid, and Angeal decides to take time to help Zack. Genesis himself confronts Hojo, who sort of says that, you know, you're a moron, basically, and that Hollander is a second-rate scientist, and he wouldn't be able to do the cure like he promised. Genesis once again quotes Lovelace quite a bit, and Hojo then talks about a missing fifth act with only a single line remaining. Basically, Lovelace is unfinished, supposedly, and Genesis has a theory about how it ends. But in the end, we end up having to fight another version of Bahamut Fury, which obviously is a tough fight. So once we sort of repel Genesis from Shinra again, we're sent to Medeaheim, which is a super frigid, cold, just a really nasty place to be. Really, it's not pleasant. And Zack and Sung are in a helicopter which gets shot down by Genesis's forces, and the group, they're with some infantrymen as well, end up walking through the frigid wastes. At this point, we find out that one of the infantrymen is indeed Cloud Strife, the Cloud Strife. Basically, there's a bit of a joke that they're both country boys, and one of the infantrymen removes his helmet, and like I say, they become friends. In Medeaheim, we find an abandoned warehouse Genesis has been using as a secondary base. We end up rescuing Hollander, weirdly, from Genesis, who's become very sort of vengeful and just horrible. And he's gone against Hollander because of his failure to be able to like regenerate him, and obviously Hojo's words are still ringing in his ears about the fact that he won't be able to do it. Genesis decides that he needs Genova cells to find a cure. No one knows where Genova is. She's an extraterrestrial that ended up crashing to Earth, and she was it was mistaken as an ancient, which we'll get onto in a bit. So Genesis and Zack end up having a bit of a duel, but Genesis is really weak. So we defeat him fairly easily. Genesis falls over the edge into an abyss, and we obviously at that point assume KIA, dead. And Hollander ends up doing a runner into Medeaheim. So we end up travelling to a bathhouse within Medeaheim, and Zack finds Angeal and Hollander. Hollander then tells how Angeal is the true success of Project G, having the Genova's power of a two-way genetic split, and he can pass on his genes, basically. Genesis can't. And then we also discover that Project G doesn't stand for Genesis, but Jillian, which is the name of Angeal's mother. And it was Hollander that injected the cells into Jillian. Angeal didn't, we find out, kill his mother, but she had taken her own life. Basically, she committed suicide. Angeal then decides he doesn't want to be like part of the story anymore, and he turns himself into a monster. Basically, he absorbs a load of Angeal copies, the monsters, and basically becomes this sort of horrible amalgamation of them all, and becomes a boss fight. And we end up taking him on, obviously winning eventually. And Angeal, in his last sort of moments, he passes the Buster Sword on to Zack. I don't think I actually mentioned this yet, but Angeal is the original owner of the Buster Sword, which is a pretty cool tidbit of knowledge. And sorry I didn't mention that before, actually. And it seems like all is well, because Angeal's dealt with, Holland has been captured, and Genesis is presumed dead. So all seems well. Zack basically becomes like a sort of a mentored soldier at this point, because obviously he's been promoted to first class and he's got a ton of experience at this point. Obviously Angeal's gone, Genesis is gone. There's just seemingly him and Sephiroth left. So he visits Aerith quite a lot, at which point he's sort of mourning Angeal quite a bit. And at this point, the Shinra obviously know that he's obviously miserable, so they send him to Costa del Sol, which again, if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan, you'll know where that is. However, it doesn't seem to be over, because he gets attacked by Genesis copies, who are very intent on making his vacation a short-lived one. Once we end up killing those, might I add, with a parasol, I kid you not, do check out Chapter 6 if you don't believe me. It's discovered that Cisne is there, and it's pretty obvious that she's been sort of watching him, keeping an eye on him. So, at that point, Cisne kind of speculates that Genesis might be controlling his copies from the live stream, so beyond the grave, basically. And the live stream is effectively like a plane of the afterlife. It's a plane of sort of existence after death, where you return to the planet as a spiritual form. So after we defeat the copies, we end up going to Junon, where Genesis has once again launched a sort of a full-scale assault. Junon is where Dr. Hollander was sent after being taken in Medeaheim, after he was captured. And Genesis and his armies sort of wreaking chaos enough for Hollander to slip free. The attack was apparently a success because of inside information from Lazard, Director Lazard. He actually betrayed the Shinra, and he ends up getting Genesis' attack successful, which is insane when you think about it. Like, this is the director of Soldier, this is the guy that's directing everything, and he's betrayed the Shinra. It's mad. We end up finding Hollander chasing throughout Junon, but Genesis, of course, grabs him and flies away. But it seems that Genesis is still very much alive, but suffering from the degradation quite heavily at this point. So there's a little bit more to cover. Back in, we go back to Midgar, and Zack realises that the Shinra security robots are attacking civilians. We end up going looking for Aerith, obviously, because she's in trouble in the church, which has also been sort of attacked by robots. But there is a Angeal monster, like a dog, that basically helps her, which is weird. It's like a guardian. So it's almost like Angeal's legacy. Sephiroth is appointed a leader at this point over soldier operations, and as it seems that Genesis is targeting Mako reactors at this point, he takes them to Nibelheim because there's a reactor there. We visit Aerith one last time, and we build her a flower cart so we can earn some money. She can earn some money, sorry. But it doesn't go well. At that point, Zack is forced to leave Midgar. And weirdly, this is kind of a point of no return. We never really return to Midgar at this point, I don't believe. Again, I haven't played the finale yet, so it's quite interesting that that is kind of a point of change. Cloud ends up going with them at this point. Cloud's kind of been out of the story a little bit at this point, but he ends up going with them to Nibelheim, and this is where his past is very muddled in the original game, because he thinks he's the soldier, if you remember, that goes to Nibelheim with Sephiroth, and it's not true. It's actually Zack, but Cloud was the infantryman that was with them. Interesting. And anyway, they're taken to Nibel Reactor by Tifa. Again, you should know that name. Cloud, I think at this point he's kind of embarrassed that he's a main soldier, so he keeps his helmet on, keeps his face mask on, and when they get to the reactor, they find a lot of monsters created by sort of capsules that are overexposing people to Marco energy, because soldiers are traditionally made by showering them with Marco energy to give them an inhuman boost, but still resembling humanity in every way. It just sort of makes them superhuman. These people have been subjected to long sort of days, weeks, months of exposure, which obviously isn't good. Sephiroth at this point finds a room labelled Genova, who he believes is the name of his mother. And Genesis kind of appears at this point and tells Sephiroth he was born out of Genova Project S. Hojo and Professor Gast, who is another professor from Shinra. Sephiroth cannot create, supposedly can't create copies, and thus he doesn't degrade because he can't pass his genetic legacy on. And at this point, Genesis keeps calling Sephiroth the perfect monster. Sephiroth kind of doesn't believe it, but he starts to question things. So Sephiroth ends up going to the local manor, which was used by Shinra, and reads Professor Gast's notes on Project S of the Genova Project. Sephiroth comes to believe that Genova is a Sceptra, or an ancient, and the last of their race, and the rightful heir to the planet. And he basically blames the extinction of the ancients on humans, who turned their back on them at their time of need. He drives himself mad, effectively, by the knowledge of what he thinks is the knowledge of his birth. He ends up torching Nibelheim. He sets it on fire completely, killing most of its citizens. And Zack pursues him up the mountain to the reactor, where Sephiroth tries to free his supposed mother from a containment tank, and ends up cutting Tifa along the way. Sephiroth defeats Zack. Obviously, there's no way Zack can take on Sephiroth. Sephiroth, if you don't know, is like ridiculously powerful at this point. And Cloud kind of arrives out of the blue at this point and catches Sephiroth off guard and blames Sephiroth for the death of his mother. And obviously he's not very happy about Tifa's injuries either, because Tifa is his childhood friend. They grew up together. So Cloud throws Sephiroth in the live stream. Effectively, they end up having a short bout. Sephiroth stabs Cloud, but somehow Cloud pulls himself onto Sephiroth's sword and ends up using the sword as leverage to throw Sephiroth off the platform and into the abyss. Sephiroth has Genova's head at this point, which is important because he now has Genova DNA. Hojo ends up taking the bodies of Zack and Cloud and tries to create more clones out of them. Basically, we find them sort of in tanks, like they would be if they were clones of either Sephiroth, Genesis, or Angeal. At this point, we assume that he's trying to make Sephiroth copies. So Zack and Cloud are deemed failures and left in their tanks for a few years. Zack is bust out by what looks like Angeal, but obviously Angeal's dead at this point. Zack, being a soldier, is resistant to Mako exposure, and he has the strength to sort of pull Cloud out and drag him towards Nibelheim. But as he does, he gets attacked by Shinra's soldiers. So it's pretty obvious at this point that Zack is considered either an exile or, as far as Shinra is concerned, dead. So obviously not what he expected. So yeah, they end up leaving Nibelheim. This is where Zack actually dresses Cloud as a first-class soldier at this point, which is quite interesting. Whilst they're escaping through the countryside, we run into Cisne again, who basically alludes to the fact that Shinra is very much on their tail and has sent soldiers and the army to recapture Cloud and Zack. And Cisne is convinced by Zack to let them go on the basis that Cloud's in a really bad way. Cloud at this point is pretty much vegetative. He's very much out of action at this point. He's sort of aware, but not at the same time. He keeps slipping in and out of consciousness. Whilst they're on the run in a stolen motorbike, they run into Genesis again, and Zack and Cloud are now infused with S cells. Genesis wants to take the two to stop his degradation. A Genesis copy tests Genesis' plan by eating a lock of Zack's hair, but it turns the copy into a monster, which then turns into a boss fight. Zack ends up going home to Gongaga. Let me just have a quick drink. I've been talking for a few minutes now. Oh, thank you. Excuse me. He ends up travelling towards Gongaga, which is Zack's hometown. But Cisne once again appears and sort of warns him that it's really obvious and the Shinra army will expect this. And Genesis and Hollander turn up and attack. Hollander's now actually become a Genesis copy himself. And Zack ends up killing Hollander. The person who Zack thought was Angeal when they're in the tanks actually turns out is Lazard. He's an Angeal copy. And he's dying of degradation, just like Angeal did. Or was in process of. Lazard helped Zack because he's got this sort of passed down honor from Angeal, and he wants to help Zack as best he can. So Zack ends up sort of working out where Genesis has been hiding, and he sort of puts two and two together that he's always carrying a white Benoran apple and must have been hiding somewhere in Benora, because that's the only place you can get them. Zack ends up leaving Lazard to look over Cloud, and we end up in an underground cave beneath what used to be Benora Village. The live stream is everywhere here. You can see its abundance within the crater we're in. And on the way in, we find Genesis's hideout. It's an old hideout, but it's got things like awards there and cuttings from when he was a child, and appeared in newspapers and things like that. So he's obviously still got a very strong sense of remembering who he was. And as we make our way around this sort of underground cave, we find quotes of Lovelace engraved on gravestones, which is further adding to the idea that this story of Lovelace is very much a parody of the game's story. Now, I can't really say much more about the story because A, I haven't seen it yet, and B, well, I have a long time ago, but it's very muddled, and B, I don't want to spoil things for myself or for you. So from here on out, I hope that's useful to you in some form. I know I'm not the best sort of storyteller in the world, but I was wanting to give you the facts. So when you've seen this episode, and there will be another mission episode after this one, I'm going to upload them one today and one on Saturday, so you've got both mission episodes this week, and the next week will be the finale, we hope. So up till now, I want to give some thoughts on the game itself. In the next mission episode, I'm going to talk a bit more about this, but I'll be honest, I've really enjoyed this game a lot more than I did the first time on the PSP, and I want to explain why. When I played it on the PSP, the DMW system, which is the random limit break leveling up system that they put in the game, really was not explained very well, and to be honest, I ended up hating it because of how random it was, and it breaks the general aesthetic in a JRPG where you have to level up, you grind, you level up, you become more powerful. Now in this game, you do become more powerful by leveling up, but leveling up is random. So as I said at the start, it's pretty obvious that materia is the key to getting stronger. Now, as I've gone through the actual main game, I've found that actually battles in this game are generally very easy. Easier than maybe I hoped they'd be. There's a couple of hard battles here and there, and obviously some of the bosses are pretty tough. But even when we fought Sephiroth in the Mako reactor, it wasn't hard. Like, it wasn't really a challenge. There was a couple of gotcha moments throughout the game where like they just threw something at you and it just happened to do enough damage to one-shot you, but then you find a way around it and you end up dealing with it. Now, when I started doing these missions for this run, I found that actually the game suddenly gets a lot harder. I just kind of wished that it wasn't a menu-based mission system. That's all. I wish it was kind of woven into the game somehow. But going back to the game quickly, I found the game easy, but it's enjoyable, and it fills so many gaps between Final Fantasy VII and Before Crisis, which is the story of before the Crisis Core, basically, and it sort of talks about the Turks a lot. But I'm not going to get into that because I've never played the game, because it was Before Crisis, I believe, was a mobile phone game in Japan, and it was never released outside of Japan, sadly. But it's not necessary to know the basic stories, thankfully. Now, this as a game, I've found it a little jarring at the start because Zack's, well, everyone's voice actor in the cutscenes is the same. However, when you're playing the game, a lot of them have changed, and obviously it's quite jarring. So I don't know why they didn't sort of record or re-record the voices, but again, it's a small thing, you get used to it. Presentation-wise, this game is so far ahead of the PSP version. Like, so far ahead. Which it should be, it's a PS5 game. Well, this version is at least. And you get a sense of this game, the story, it's very much a tragedy. Like, so much bad happens, it's so negative what happens to this cast of characters. And unlike in 7, where there's a lot of sort of moments of camaraderie and there's moments of humour, I found with this game there's not actually a lot of that to offset the bad, if that makes sense. Especially as the game goes on and obviously Genesis disappears, Angeal disappears, Sephiroth disappears. There's a lot of very serious themes, and don't get me wrong, I know Final Fantasy VII's a very serious game as well, but there's at least the banter between Cloud and Red, or Cloud and Barret, or Tifa and Barret, and that's really cool. Or Cid later on. Now, obviously, the other thing to consider is a lot of Final Fantasy VII based games have been declared non-canon because of remake. Now, I'm not sure where Crisis Core sits on that, so I'm going to have to look that up for the next episode. But yeah, going back to the game, sorry, I'm on a tangent. I love the fact that you have to fight the summons to get them. I've always liked that system. However, they're pretty much all story-based, so you can't really miss them. Now, I know there's others that we've potentially missed at this point, but the main ones, like I said, Bahamut Fury and all the rest of it, they're pretty much unmissable. Well, they are unmissable. Which is interesting. I know in Final Fantasy VIII there was a few that were unmissable, like Ifrit and Shiva and Quetzalcoatl and what have you, but yeah, it's just interesting the way they've done it. The battle system, it's okay. It's a real-time system, which I'm not a big fan of. Unlike remakes go at combining your turn-based and real-time, which it did really well, I might add. I'm not a massive fan of the action-based system of this game. I can live with it, but I find it requires you to be very quick on knowing where buttons are, and because when you open the materia menu there's like 6 buttons to choose from, you've got to be very quick. The DMW I like more this time because it is still random, of course, but it's explained. Like, there's actually a proper explanation of what it does and what it represents. And also, if you want to grind to get better DMWs and to get level ups and what have you, you can. Yeah, there's missions that you can replay and replay and replay. There's a really good one, which is actually the first mission in the missions menu, which is fighting 100 Shinra soldiers, 200 Shinra soldiers, and then eventually up to 1,000 of them. Now, I did actually do those missions, believe it or not, but I didn't have the heart to put it in the episode, because I was like, you don't want to watch me kill 2,000 soldiers over 5 missions. It's just not fun. Even with the story being told over the top, it's just not interesting. So I cut that out. I apologise. If you really want to see it, I'll put it in the next one. But it's nothing exciting. Now, as we go through the missions here, basically I'm just, as I said before, I'm trying to get as much stuff as possible. And I'm going through the menu here just to see what's sort of next on the agenda. We're still dealing with Genesis forces at this point. So this is like dealing with the forces that have broken away from the main war zones and they're just causing trouble. Now, another thing I wish Crisis Core did with the missions, I wish they had more environments or different parts of different environments. Like if you're fighting within Shinra, you're fighting in this sort of type of area, like what we're seeing now, and there's nothing else really. There was actually one mission where you actually end up on a boat. You actually end up on a tanker, which is on its way to Costa del Sol. I thought that was really cool because it was different. But yeah, that's the only thing I kind of wish they did. And also, I wish they weren't all combat based. This is why I didn't do another episode based on just doing missions, because it's boring. Like, yeah, some of the missions are hard, and there's a few that I still won't do even now. We actually end up skipping a couple of the later ones within this menu because they just get really hard. And, you know, as I do other missions and level up and get better materia, blah, 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 I'll go back and give them another go. But as I said before, it's just a bit dull. Doing combat after combat after combat after combat. And I know there's only so much you can do, but the mission system I just think is a bit dull, if I'm honest. As a plus, though, it does give you an opportunity to find new stuff and find bits and pieces that you normally wouldn't find. So there's an incentive to get it done. And I suppose the idea is that you do little bits throughout the game as you go. Whereas what I've done is left it till the end and tried to do everything in one whack, which is a big mistake because materia we get will be level 1 instead of master, which is what we want. Another thing I like is the fact that you never change weapons. Not really. You start the game with a normal soldier's blade, and eventually you inherit the Buster Sword, as said in the story. Which is, I think, quite interesting. You never change weapons like you do in 7. Or any other game for that matter. Well, most games, should I say. However, to counter that, I really don't care about the Buster Sword proficiency system. Throughout the game I've been trying to learn it, and to be honest, I just don't care enough to want to do it. You don't really learn about it till chapter 6, I think it is, when you actually get the sword. And by that point, I don't really want to be learning a whole new system. And it was actually exclusive to this version of the game, and I know what they were trying to do. And don't get me wrong, it's appreciated. But it's not for me. I did get the percentage up a little bit by with against 1,000 soldiers or whatever it was. But yeah, I just didn't care enough to warrant it being the main part of what I do. I might, if I start grinding again, I might start grinding it up if I can. But I've got a build I'm pretty happy with at this point, so I don't really think it's going to matter. But I do think it's cool that you get to play a significant portion of the game with the famous Buster Sword. I was a bit worried when I played it originally that the Buster Sword would be something we got near the end. But yeah, these guys were hard, by the way. This mission was particularly tricky. So these guys keep doing a spin attack on you. And even with Thundara Blade, you just can't whittle them down fast enough. They whittle you down faster, which is annoying. So yeah, like I said, there's some really tricky missions, and I appreciate the challenge, but I just wish some of that challenge was in the main game. And but the one thing I do love is, of course, the story. Like, as much as it is a very sad story, especially more so as you go on, there are some moments which really shine, like meeting Cloud and talking to Aerith for the first time, and meeting Sung, and seeing the side of Sephiroth that everyone remembers as the hero. You know what I mean? Before he goes mad, before he becomes obsessed with destroying humanity. I think it humanizes him a little bit because he becomes likable. And to be honest, I think Sephiroth's character is great, you know, before he goes and does what he does. You know, he's almost got a very, if you've seen the Big Bang Theory, and that's a strange analogy, but if you've seen the Big Bang Theory, he's got a very Sheldon aesthetic to him, where he's very intelligent, he's extremely clever, and very quick, but has no semblance of human wit or sarcasm at all, which I find quite funny. It's like you got this super strong soldier just like entering into banter with his mates and his comrades, and he just doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it at all, and you can tell a lot of the time. Yeah, I finally remember that Thundaga is very much very effective against machines. Yeah, it's good to know that, right? But yeah, this area was full of these things, and my god, it was annoying. But yeah, overall, as we stand, I like the game. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a very loyal remake. And there are new things here. A lot of them I'm unsure about, but there are new things, and I appreciate that. I still am not a massive fan of leveling up randomly, but that's that. And the mission system, I think, could have been integrated into the main game a little bit better, as opposed to just like a menu system. So yeah, that's a thing. That's a thought. To sort of burn the last few minutes, obviously we're very aware that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is on the way, which is the second part. Now, I now have the PS5, as you all know, and I am very much looking to record it, obviously, and I'm going to try and start it on day one, like I did with the original 7. I just want to make sure you're aware of that. I'm going to try and line my projects up so that it meets the start date of FF7 Part 2. But I really don't know where the story's going to go, because at the end of 7 Part 1, we had... what did it say? It was like, the unknown journey shall continue. And obviously in 7, we see that the Whispers have been defeated, and the Whispers are the thing keeping the 7 canon in line. And also, it seems suspicious to me that Sephiroth and Aerith both seem to know an awful lot about the future, which is a bit strange. Oh, as a side note, these guys were annoying. They had a special attack called Energy. Oh my god, it like wiped like 8 grand off me. I was like, bloody hell. So, so yeah, if you haven't seen my 7 remake playlist, it is there. It's about 40 odd episodes, so this is kind of a really good time when we finish Crisis Core to sort of refresh your knowledge on the remake. And if you haven't seen the original FF7, that's also on the channel, funny enough. You can go check that out at any time. Because I think it's good to have a knowledge of the story as it was intended back in '97, as opposed to how it's been portrayed now. Now, I have played Intergrade, which is FF7 on the PS5. Now, I didn't want to record it because I didn't know how different it would be from the original 7. It turns out it's not that different. They add features to it, and they add bits of story to it, of course, but all in all, it's very much a similar experience. I also didn't want to record another 40-episode game just for a couple of tidbits. Now, at the end of Intergrade, by the way, if you don't want spoilers for Intergrade, I'm going to be talking about them for the next sort of 30 seconds to a minute. So you might want to skip ahead about a minute to avoid any spoilers. At the end of Intergrade, it is implied very heavily that Zack is around still. And if you know the history of 7, you'll know what I mean. Now, I won't say any more than that because I don't want to spoil too much. But like I said before, it's very much implied that Zack is going to be very central to the story, which is unusual. In the original 7, we don't really hear much about Zack. If you go to Gongaga, you can find Zack's parents and actually talk to them. and the last they knew of, he went to Shinra and didn't come back. He you know, sort of lived in Shinra, and that was it. Basically, that's the only bit you find out. And as far as we're concerned, that is what happens. He just disappears. But obviously, Intergrade's may be implying something different. So, like I said, I won't say much more because it'll spoil things. But Intergrade's got a very different ending, so you can YouTube that or go find out if you want to. Like I said, I didn't want to play another 40-episode game just to just for a few bits. But I am very much planning to do Rebirth when it comes out, and of course Part 3 when it comes out on the PS9 probably, because that's how long we'll have to wait for it. But as I said before, if you want to catch up with FF7, either remake or the original or both, now's a really good time, because Rebirth isn't coming out to the winter. Today's date is the 23rd of May, so I'll be uploading this the following day. So now's a really good time. We'll be hopefully finishing Crisis Core next week, next Saturday. That'll be the 31st, I think it is. Oh, 30th. I can't do dates. Don't ask me to do dates. So now's a good time. And if I was you, as we're going to be continuing the remake story, it might be a good idea to do remake. But if you want to know the history of Final Fantasy VII in its entirety, like I said, the original game's there too. Streamed in glorious 1080p, I might add. That is also a very long series. Obviously, it's a very long game. So, yeah, you can go check that out if you want to. Like I said, there's going to be another episode like this, but I think what I might do, because I obviously haven't got the story to recap again, what I might do is fast forward through it, so that it's not quite as long, because it's going to be another hour-long thing. Now, obviously, this one I've been able to fill out because I've been talking and sort of, you know, talking crap, basically, and talking nonsense and recapping the story and blah, blah, blah. So what I might do for the next one is fast forward through it, so you can still see what's going on, but it's a little faster. But yeah, we're coming up to the end now, so I want to leave you with some closing thoughts. Like I said before, I love the story this game tells. It's tragic, but in the right way. It sets up a massive legacy for Final Fantasy VII. And it explains a lot more about what Zack is all about. And who Zack is. It shows Sephiroth's good side. And sort of it shows us some new characters that are important to Zack's past, you know, and Jill and Genesis have never been mentioned anywhere before, so it's interesting to see them. Not as far as I know, at least. So I thank you for coming to this sort of mission episode. I hope you've enjoyed my rambling. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to pop in the comments. I'd love to answer those in the next mission episode on Saturday. And if I can't answer them, I will find out before I record it. So, again, apologies for anyone looking for Alien Isolation. To be honest, if you've got this far in the video, then it's not really going to matter too much, but apologies for that. But this is going to be GK signing off, and I will see you on Saturday for another mission episode, and then next week for the finale. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your day.